There's war going on in this world. A war on freedom.
He's acting outside of his authority by saying you can't put something that you want in your own body. That's your own personal choice, and can't nobody take that from you, you know?
You're one of these taxpayers, and these are all your documents, and this is how we're going to rob you. It's fucked up, man.
It's more war, it's more spending, it's more debt, and it's less freedom.
We don't do that here.
Some people think that you can't be radical and pragmatic.
This is what we need, is a pragmatic radicalism, not moderation. Hardcore radicalism, but smart shit.
It's not sitting in a fucking basement with a bunch of fucking nerds.
You don't know shit, and that's the thing. You have to talk to people who think differently than you.
Like, his focus is not how horrible the government is, it's how wonderful liberty and freedom are.
That's what drives us.
People are coming together more and more and more and more as the government has been failing us.
We're just getting started.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fight for Liberty Live. Tonight's show is going to be really great. One of the hardest working people I know in the liberty movement, and the person who personally gave me two of the biggest red pills I've ever taken in the same night, is our guest tonight. So I'm super excited. Before we get into that, I got to tell you guys just a little bit about Nugg of Knowledge. It is an awesome place to get your premium cannabis products online, legal in all 50 states. We have CBD, CBG, Delta-8, THC, some edibles, some vapes, some flower, all sorts of stuff. So go over to nuggofknowledge.com. You can use promo code F4L to get 10% off your first purchase. And then you help out the show, the network, awesome other libertarians in the movement, because this is a top-down libertarian company. So go to Nugg of Knowledge, get some weed, get high, and then rewatch this episode, because it'll probably be funnier that way. Also, Tom Queter, he's running for New York State Senate in the 52nd District, and we're all really excited about his campaign. He's out in his community. He's very active. He's been a disabilities advocate for a while. He ran last year and did the best that anyone in that at that level has ever done in New York as a libertarian, and so he's taking that momentum on again. You can check him out by clicking the link in the description. There's also a donate link in the description if you want to throw him 10, 15, 20 bucks to help us print flyers, pay staff, whatever it is. We would really appreciate it. But today, as I said, we have a guest that I'm super excited about. He is the former executive director of the Libertarian Party. He is now the executive director of People for Liberty, the one, the only, Dan Fishman. Welcome to the show.
What's up, Dave?
How is it going tonight?
It's good. You know, I think we should clarify right up that those two red pills that we're talking about, one was acid. No, just kidding. Kidding. I actually don't know what you're referring to. And so if you could tell me, that would give me some enlightenment.
So you came to New York City, I believe it was like beginning of 2019.
And yeah, for the Manhattan meeting.
Yep. And you gave a speech about why healthcare and everything that's wrong with healthcare is the government's fault. And then later at the bar, you explained why everything wrong with the education system is the government's fault. And I had never had either of those topics broken down in that way yet. I was still kind of new-ish to the movement. I'd been in for a few years, but I was learning a lot more about like tax stuff and gun stuff. And I hadn't had either of those issues broken down from a libertarian perspective and be like, this shit got expensive because government. I hadn't heard either of those two things, and you dropped both of them on me in the same night. And I was just like, wow, we really need to stop letting the government do things.
Well, the thing about it was, okay, so now I remember that exactly, because it started off, that was a Columbia Young Americans for Liberty meeting, as I recall.
Right.
Set up by, at the time, Dursey, my good friend Dursey, who's now running a campaign up in New Hampshire. And so, you know, I'm coming to Columbia. It's pretty easy to talk about how crazy expensive education is, because I believe Columbia is running 70 grand a year now. So yeah.
Jesus. That's, yeah, it's not worth that much.
It's not. Well, it's I mean, it's an interesting thing. You know, everything is worth what it's worth. And we have this whole thing of like, you know, currency related to value. You know, here's another red pill. One of the biggest problems that we're having right now is people don't understand the difference between currency, value, and wealth. Now, wealth is only ever. your time, and your health. Because if you don't have those things, you've got nothing, right? You have a pile of currency, but you're in a hospital bed. Big deal. Value are things that don't change money. And so I was down at the Students for Liberty Freer Future Fest in Nashville a couple months ago. And we had a big conversation with a lot of people who were really happy about Bitcoin. And I irritated a lot of people when I said, you know, whatever else you want to say about it, Bitcoin is a currency. It is not a thing of value. And the reason why is because, and they're like, well, gold's not valuable. I'm like, you're crazy. Gold's super valuable because you can't make cell phones or computers without gold. So tell me now that gold's not valuable. And ask anybody who's ever had really bad dental pain that was fixed by a golden crown. Gold is worth its weight in gold. Bitcoin's awesome for what it is. I love Bitcoin. I was an early investor. However, it is always just going to be a currency because you can't do anything else with it except for it being Bitcoin. So we need to keep track of it. When we think about education, you know, we exchange currency for something that does have value. And so we can say $70,000, it's not worth that. But, you know, what's $70,000 going to be in 2 months, in 2 years, in 20 years? You still have that education. You'll still be getting a degree based upon it. Now, what's it going to cost you, loans, stuff like that? It's a huge pain in the ass to think about. But currency and value and understanding the difference between them is one of the things that can really set us free in thinking about the fact that we don't need to fall into the traps of what the government wants us to do with their currency.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't imagine someone having a Bitcoin crown. I don't think that would work.
You are really quiet right now. Your volume is low. Nothing.
Because I was
there. You go.
Wrong
Awesome.
Microphone.
Yep.
I switched out all the rest.
I was prepared to fill.
I switched out all the rest of the things we were talking about before we went live. My microphone was still the wrong microphone. I even had to replug this in. Still didn't change it. All right. So I usually start out by asking some variation of a libertarian testimony. So I'm curious, when you first heard it, what was and found out about them, what was your first impression of libertarians and libertarianism?
So I didn't really know about the phrase libertarianism or the Libertarian Party or anything like that. But pretty early on, I knew that I was a libertarian. So I grew up in a deep Democrat academic household. My dad is a scientist. My mom's a librarian, a real librarian, not just somebody who works in a library. And early on, so I went to nursery school as a kid, and there was a carpool. And at one point in time, I was sitting in the back seat and something was going on. I wanted to see what was going on. I took off the seatbelt. The seatbelts were new then anyway. This is early 70s. And to look out the window, and the woman who was driving yelled at me. She's like, "Daniel Fishman, you need to sit down right now and fasten that seatbelt, or I'm going to pull this car over and you can walk home." I'm like, I was all scared, and I sat down and fastened the seatbelt. But that night, I thought about it, and I'm like, oh, I don't like it the way she was able to order me around and boss me around. Like, I don't even like it when my parents do it, let alone this stranger. So then the next day, she's driving in the carpool and we're driving home, and I'm like playing with my seatbelt, and I take it apart and I'm waving in front of her. She's like, "Daniel Fishman, if you don't stop, then I'm going to pull this car over right now." And I keep doing it. She pulls the car over, and I open the door and I bolt. Right. So here I am, 5 years old, running out of the car. And it's a nightmare for this woman because she's in the carpool. I went to a grocery store. I sat by the grapes, and I was just sitting there eating grapes. And eventually they found me. You can imagine what a nightmare that would be, nowadays. But at that point in time, I had a feeling. I'm like, you know what? I don't like being told what to do. And I had to reconcile that later on with, I don't like being told what to do, but I really like helping people. And so if you ask me to help, like, put my shoulder to the wheel so that we can move something heavy, I'm there. I'll be one of the first people there. I want to do that. But if you try to harness me to move that same heavy weight, fuck that, man. Yeah, I'm assuming I can swear on your show.
Oh, yeah.
I will spit the bit. I will fight against you. If you try to make me do something, even if it's something that I want to do, if you try to make me do it, we're going to fight. And so my sort of first political awareness in fourth grade, we did a mock presidential debate. What do fourth graders know about politics? I was Bob Dole, and my buddy was Gerald Ford. We didn't know anything. I remember our campaign slogan was 9 out of 10 Fords are still on the road. But a little later on, around 1980, more out of just pure oppositionism than anything else, my parents were very much fans of Jimmy Carter. And, I thought, you know what? I like Ronald Reagan. But I started listening to what he said, and I'm like, it makes a lot of sense to me. And so about 1980, 81, I sort of declared myself as a Republican. My parents are horrified. But I'm like into it. I'm into Reaganism, stuff like that. And then around 82, Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson make it clear the Republican Party is not for me. They don't want people like me. They are very much a moral majority. And I don't believe in that. Even then, I didn't believe in that. And I mean, I'm a lot weirder now than I was then. But so the thing that happened, though, was that my local congressman was Ron Paul. I grew up in Galveston, Texas.
Oh, wow.
And so I happened to catch Dr. Paul, as he was known at the time. And, just one of the basic things about don't let other people do things for you, because if you let them do things for you, then you're dependent on them. I'm like, that's me. I don't want that ride home. I want to go eat grapes in the grocery store. So I started to get into that. Then I kind of moved away, a bunch of different careers. I started off my first career was I was a SPED teacher. I taught special education for people who don't know SPED stands for. I did that for 7 years. And then I was in a place where I thought I was going to get married. We were going to have kids. And I thought, I can't provide for my family on a teacher's salary. As terrible as that is. I'm like, I have the ability, go back to school, get a computer science degree. So I did that. Like 1 year after I went back to school, the relationship ended. I did not marry that girl. We didn't have any kids together. But I am glad that I got that. And I'm glad that I had that background, because teaching special education students, and specifically I focused on autistic students, that was tremendous preparation for working with other software engineers.
And then libertarians.
Well, that's exactly it. There's no question about it, that there are times that people say to me, you're so patient. How did you know? I'm like, well, honestly, these guys aren't so bad. I mean, none of them are trying to bite me. And I mean, the occasional libertarian will try to bite you, but usually they'll ask for consent beforehand.
Have you ever met Miss Winky?
So I did get I got my CS degree. I went to work for a company called anyday.com. I got lucky. We got bought by Palm, which made the first little handheld device, the Palm Pilot. Then I went on and worked for Mass General, wrote their distance learning program. And then I found this great job writing software for special education. So it really brought me full loop in terms of the stuff that I was doing. And then in 2011, at the end of 2011, Barack Obama signed the National Defense Authorization Act that suspended habeas corpus and said, if they think that you're doing terrorist things, then they can take you downtown. They can ask you questions. They can hold you without the right to an attorney. They can hold you without the right to a speedy trial. And that spoke to my family's personal history. My grandmother came over from Ukraine because one day she and her sisters and her mother came home from the market, 7 girls. She was 4 at the time. And her father was gone. And they asked the neighbors what happened. And they said, oh, the police came and took him. They went down to the police station. The police were like, yeah, we have no idea where he is. So he was just gone. And so my family, my grandmother's side, came to the United States, a place where that's not supposed to happen. We have this idea that the police can't just disappear you. So when Barack Obama changed that and said, oh, yeah, no, under the war of terror, we can disappear you for a little while. I'm like, I can talk about this. I can run for Congress because it's a federal issue and talk about it. So got together. It was my first campaign because I'd never run for anything before. And I'd been a member of the Libertarian Party, like a dues paying member, much longer. But this is the first time that I really got involved in things that were happening. And this is 2012. I didn't know anything. And I made a bunch of the mistakes that well-meaning people will make. And especially well-meaning people with some ability, because I had the ability to just fund my own campaign. And so I did. That's the stupidest thing you can possibly do. Because if you don't ask people to invest in your campaign, then they won't be invested in your campaign. And everybody knows that asking for money is the worst possible thing. In fact, I'm getting ready to do this, and we'll come back to this. People for Liberty, we're doing our end of the year. This is the giving season, all that stuff. And the nature of my job, I have to ask people for money. But people understand how terrible that is. And it helps them to identify with you. It makes your issue seem important. If you're not willing to ask for money, it doesn't seem like you really want it that much. The campaign, however, went pretty well. I got lucky. So Massachusetts politics are different than anywhere else. The Republican that I ran against, Richard Tassay, a married gay man who was pro-choice. That's a Massachusetts Republican. The Democrat, John Tierney, or Johnny Pockets, as they called him, 8 terms in office. His wife had just gone to jail for money laundering for 30 days because her cousins, who are running an illegal offshore casino, and I want to be clear, I don't think there is such a thing as an illegal offshore casino, but the government did at the time. So her cousins had sent her $200,000, which she had then laundered for them. So she went to jail for 30 days, and on the stand, they said, "What did your husband know about this?" And she said, "I am invoking spousal privilege to not testify against my husband." So, that's a badge of honor for a Democrat in Massachusetts. So the Republicans thought, though, they were going to win. They thought Richard Tassay could win. And so they put a lot of money into the race, $2 million. The Democrats responded. So there's $4 million between the Republican and Democrat. It was the most expensive race in the country that year. And then here was me. But there was so much animosity, because it was sort of a prelude to what was going to happen in the country later on, that the Democrats, the first debate they held, they scheduled the first debate for the day of the Republican National Convention. And so, of course, the Republican couldn't make it. And he wasn't going to go anyway, because it was at a senior center in Lynn talking about Medicaid. So to legitimize the debate, the Democrat invited me. So I am sweating bullets, right? I'm like, what do I know about Medicaid? But I had, 2 weeks to prepare for it. I went down, I talked to my parents who were senior citizens. I did all the research, get in there, and never having been in a big congressional campaign, I wasn't prepared for what it was going to be like. It's at a community college, and there are people with signs outside and stuff like that. We get inside, and here comes the congressman. It's the first time I've met him. He's tall, old, but a good-looking guy. Amazing hair. Shakes hands. "How's it going, Dan? Nice to meet you." We talk, and then the debate kicks off about Medicaid. And within 10 minutes, it becomes apparent I am the subject matter expert on Medicaid in the room. He has no idea. Like, his thing is all about it. Like, he's talking about, like, oh, we want to make sure that Medicaid happens, stuff like that. I'm like, well, let's talk about some of the loss centers that are happening in Medicaid right now. Seniors are getting ripped off because of this. It's like, oh, I wasn't aware of that. I'm like, ask any of these seniors. They'll tell you this is a big problem for them. Of course, none of that matters. 2 weeks later, the Republican schedules a debate on Fox News in Boston. Tierney's not going. So they bring me down. And this time, the Fox sets it up in a sort of Fox manner. They have 3 chairs on stage. Me, the Republican, and then a empty chair with a microphone in it. And so they'll ask questions, and they'll occasionally cut to the empty chair. At one point in time, they asked me a question. They say, Mr. Fishman, the Democrat has set up a site attacking the Republican, and the Republican has a separate website attacking the Democrat. It's such a cantankerous campaign. How do you feel about jumping in the middle of that? I'm like, well, one of the things about being a third-party candidate is there's some things that you have to do for yourself. I had to set up my own website attacking myself so that I could have equal parity. Everybody loved that. And then after that, I got invited to every debate. And the thing was, we had actually set up that website. So it was like very clumsily photoshopped pictures of me and Derek Jeter, obviously Boston Yankees, stuff like that. So we had an attack website that looked completely fake. It was fantastic. So that's sort of my story. And at that point in time, at the end of the campaign, I had been in like 24 debates, which that was awesome. And I, like I said, I didn't take a lot of money, but a lot of people came up to me and said, "You earned my vote." I was never going to vote for Tassay. I was never going to vote for Tierney. I just wanted to see what people had to say. You inspired me to vote for you. And so that was very nice. Ended up with 17,000 votes, which was 4.5%. But the margin of victory was 800 votes. So you can imagine the Democrats said, the Republicans, the Democrat won. And the Republicans like, Fishman spoiled the race. He took away all those fiscal conservatives. I'm like, this guy could have gotten the fiscal conservatives, but he's a fiscal liberal. Everything he says, he's a Massachusetts Republican. And so they, after that, I'm like, you know what? I can do this. This is my service to the country. And, I talked about the fact beforehand that, I knew I was a weird kid, 13, and I'm much weirder now. I recognize the fact that any other country in the world, I would probably be in jail. And so you can hear me say that I'm, anti-government, but I love this country. The debt that I owe to this country is enormous because any other country, I would be in prison. I am convinced of that. And so the way that I can repay my debt to that country is to talk about liberty. Somebody just posted this great quote where they said, liberty doesn't make men free, but it makes them men. And it's so important to me. The idea that, our lives are nothing unless we have that liberty in it. And I see it going away. And so I felt like I had to do more. So I became the political director of the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts. We had a goal in 2014 to run more candidates for State House than the Republicans. We didn't quite make it, but we were close. I was very excited about that. And then 2016, I think I'm done at that point in time. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go back to just being a software guy, make a lot of money, be very content. And when Gary Johnson got the nomination, then Bill Weld got the vice president, he sent me a note. He's like, Dan, I've been following you in the state of Massachusetts. You should be the Northeast director for the Johnson-Weld campaign. I'm like, I absolutely should not. I understand what people do well and what they don't, especially I understand what I do well. You want somebody who actually knows how to do things political, how to run a campaign, stuff like that. They're like, all right, well, we'll ask around. Second time they came back to me and they said, Dan, we think you're the right guy. We look at your career and you have a career of being successful. That alone is relatively unique in the libertarian universe. And so we know that you can do things. We think you should be it. And I'm like, guys, there's got to be somebody who has the experience of actually planning a campaign, scheduling, fundraising, all that stuff. And the third time they came back and they're like, look, if you don't do it, we're giving this job to this person who I knew was an idiot. So they essentially threatened me saying the campaign will fail if you don't take the job. So I took the job. It was fantastic.
You'll have to tell me after we go offline who that person was.
Okay, I'll tell you offline, but I'm not going to say it on the camera. But it was an amazing experience because I went into it saying, okay, my job right now is to learn everything I can as quickly as possible. And I ended up working with Apollo Pizzell, who people in the Liberty Movement will know who he is. He is the master of elections in the Libertarian Party. He knows more about how to win an election than anybody else. And he was incredibly generous with his knowledge. If I would just sit there and shut up, which I was able to do. And again, that makes me somewhat unique among libertarians in the movement. But here I am with an expert in the field on how to do things. How stupid would it be for me to argue with him? So now I can plan an event. I know how to order risers and stage dressing. I know what the sound requirements are to fill a room. All these things that I learned from Apollo. I know how to schedule transportation. I know how to schedule meals, stuff like that. All these things that I learned by working on that campaign. It was great. It was a tremendous experience. Then I was like, okay, now I'm done. I'm not doing anything else in the party. I'm going to go back to work. And then in 2018, we needed ballot access in Massachusetts. If we had a candidate run for auditor, or it could have been any race, but auditor made the most sense to me. We essentially saved the party $60,000 when it came to the presidential race 2 years later. So they said, okay, Dan, will you run this race? And I'm I'm like, you know what? I'll do it because I've learned so much about how to run a race from the 2016 campaign. So we declared early. One of the really important things we did was we declared in October so we could do fundraising from October through December and then come back to all those people in the next fiscal year, because the year resets, they get to reset their donation. So, you know, our top 20 donors maxed out in 2 years for us. That was awesome. I knew that there were times it was worthwhile to travel around the country. So I went to the California convention and the Texas convention because I knew I could raise more there in donations than I would pay in my plane fare to get there. And I mean, obviously, everybody knows what it's like when you're on the campaign. You stay at your friend's place, you camp out, travel as cheaply as possible, but raise money while you're in those places. And so that worked too. We ended up raising about $60,000, which is pretty good for a statewide campaign in Massachusetts. We had a great campaign slogan. Why would you elect a Republican or a Democrat to audit Republicans and Democrats? It's the one race in which a libertarian should have the office. And then I got lucky. I say lucky, but in August, the company that I was working for got bought for the second time in a year. They got bought by a pre-IPO company named Thoma Bravo, who came to me and said, you know, Dan, you're really old and you're making a lot of money. We'd like to give you a severance check and have you stop working here. I'm like, oh, it's awesome. They're run for office full time from August to December, or August to November. So that's what I did. It was a great race. I got endorsed by every major paper in the state of Massachusetts, including the Boston Globe. First time they'd ever endorsed a Libertarian. It was a great campaign, 4.5%. And that's when I realized, excuse me, that the party needs more than just what one person can offer in an election. There has to be a larger mission of waking up the country to libertarianism. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, the party was looking for an executive director. Nick put up a post, and I said, what's involved? And he said, well, number one, you're going to have to move to DC. And that was almost a deal breaker for me right there. I had been in Boston for 25 years. I had just this awesome posse, bunch of people, same age as me, same boat. None of us had kids. We would take vacations together. We used to always go to Saratoga. I don't know if you've ever gone to the races in Saratoga as a New Yorker, but wonderful thing. So we would go to Travers every year together, rent a house. Amazing. So this wonderful group of friends, great jobs, stuff like that. But, you know, I thought about it. I'm like, this is it. You know, this is my chance to come and do more for the liberty movement than I could do in any other opportunity. And so put your money where your mouth is, man. Go down there and take that job. And so I did, executive director for 2 years. My term expired in January. And then I was planning on going back into software and making money. But by now we know how that story ends.
Yeah.
Lauren Postler, who's the founder of People for Liberty, came and she's like, Dan, you can't do it now. Okay. This is not the time to walk away from the movement because you know, you built up a legacy of people who know you, who know what you stand for. And that's great and valuable. But secondly, you're a strong communicator on these basic issues. Now's the time to build an organization that's meant to be larger than the Libertarian Party. And I understand that now because, I mean, when I got 4.5% in Massachusetts, I got over 100 times the number of votes of registered libertarians. So it's important to know that just winning the libertarian vote is clearly not enough. And so figuring out how we get people in, and People for Liberty is focused on using digital marketing techniques. That for me as a software guy and an internet engineer for a long time, I get that. Stuff like this, right? When this plays on YouTube, you're going to be able to go and look at the statistics and see the people who were logged in and viewed to it, subscribers, stuff like that, pushing those things. Incidentally, anybody watching on YouTube right now, mash that subscribe button right now and hit that like, but hit subscribe to get notified when new videos, Fight for Liberty, are coming on. That sort of thing is critical though, because now you get those people into your email lists and you know what? These people came in and they watched Dan Fishman, or these people came in and they watched Scott Horton, or I think you got Larry Sharp coming up. I don't want to promo your whole, but, that's a really important thing because those little digital fingerprints. And so the same thing, we're generating videos, we're generating written content, things on Facebook, everything else. And whenever somebody does something, we record that they did that. Now, that's going to sound a little creepy to some libertarians, But it's important because we need to identify people that's what their liberty jam is. So, and the last thing I'll say, and I realize I've been monologuing a little bit here, but the best example of something like that is on Easter, Joe put out a tweet and a Facebook post. Happy Easter to everybody who celebrates it. A day of peace should always be recognized. 50% of libertarians go bullshit. How dare you mention a Christian holiday on your Facebook page? Blah, 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 right? But a lot of people clicked that they loved that. Okay. And every person who clicked that they loved that, we followed up with them in person in a Facebook message. Hey, we have a group called Christians for Liberty. Here's the link to it. You might enjoy the conversations that are happening in there. And I want to say 10 weeks ago now, a woman posted there. She said, hey, I'm Christian and I'm a baker. I'm like, oh no, where is this going? She said, oh, but a police officer came into my bakery and he told me that I couldn't give my day olds anymore to the homeless shelter because the city passed a law that says everything has to be certified by the government before you can give it to a local shelter. She's like, so for me as a Christian, I feel compelled to help the poor. Can everybody in this group help me get together and find laws that stop us from helping the poor? And then let's get rid of them. And so now you have a lot of people
Nice.
who don't identify as libertarian, doing some really libertarian shit, which is awesome. So that's what I like about what People for Liberty is doing, is we're people identifying with those one issues. And if you're all the people who are in Christians for Liberty, we're getting our newsletter, we give them some very specific content about things that we think they're going to like. You get a somewhat different messaging if you're in Christians for Liberty than if you came in through, End the War on Drugs or something else. We want to find the one issue that appeals to you because we know, I did this actually in Syracuse. Unfortunately, the room was empty by the time I got up to speak. But I said, how many people here came to the Libertarian Party because of one issue that they sort of woke them up and talked about it? Everybody raised their hand. I said, okay, now, how many people think that most people have one issue on which they're actually a libertarian? Everybody's like, yeah. I'm like, so our problem is solved. We just have to find a way to combine those things. That's what People for Liberty is dedicated to doing. So now
I love that.
Second,
we'll come back to People for Liberty because I very much love the mission and what you guys are doing there, and I'm trying to nail Lauren down to get her on the show too to talk about that stuff.
She's an amazing talent.
Yeah, she's an amazing talent and a very difficult person to get a hold of sometimes. I've hung out with her multiple times this year, and I I know it's not like a weird I'm trying to reach and get a guest. It's like someone that I know, and it's just the communication.
I will say that right now what she's doing, and I'm going to plug her new gig as well. She's obviously chair of People for Liberty, but she's also working for an amazing organization called Psych Armor, PSYCH Armor, and essentially helps the veteran community with mental illness awareness of resources that are available. Because there are a lot of things available, but a lot of times people don't know what's actually available to them. So connecting the resources and the people who need them. And, we all know the 22 number, veteran commits suicide every 22 seconds in the United States. It's terrible. And that thing, what she's doing, that's awesome work. But I know that you're on our list, Dave. So soon.
Yeah. She connected you, me, and Holly to get everybody on the show. And then, I don't mean to be talking to you. That's really awesome though. I hadn't heard about that project, and I'm definitely going to have to go do some more research because that's really cool. It's like you're saying, it's a very big problem that not a whole lot of people were talking about, and I feel like a lot of people are talking about it now, and it's getting to that critical mass where we might actually solve the problem here pretty soon.
Yeah, and Adam Kokesh is another person who's doing a lot of good work in this space, and the way the government has been in the past keeping people from using drugs that could help them. We know about the effects of Molly or MDMA, whatever you want to call it. I guess kids call it ecstasy. No, my generation calls it ecstasy. Kids call it Molly. Whatever it is, psilocybin, mushrooms, all these drugs that are actually amazingly helpful for a lot of veterans, but are illegal most places in the United States. Why? Right? Why can veterans who gave their freedom, gave up their liberty for the country, not have the liberty to do what they need to do to become well, to experiment, stuff like that? Another issue. Adam's really big into that space too. And it's something where the liberty movement, we're doing really good work there. Let's keep it up.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the auditor race real quick, because I was a big fan of that messaging that you had there of, you know, this is the one race where a libertarian should be in office. And I very much agree with a job like auditor or, you know, attorney general. You know, there's a couple of those kind of outside of traditional races jobs that actually make a lot more sense. So I'm curious, walk me through the thought process of why you chose auditor. And I'm curious, do you think that people have a tendency to choose flashier races over the ones that might actually be able to do
For
good?
sure. For sure. I mean, if you had a choice between running for governor and running for auditor, you're going to have a much greater impact, your voice as a libertarian running for auditor. Because, I mean, it depends on who you are. But unless you've got a huge war chest, you're not going to win for governor. Okay. It's just not going to happen. Libertarians are not going to win that race. On the other hand, and for governor, you look, and I guarantee this. So this is an important thing about understanding elections. And this is a great thing that I learned from Apollo Pizzell, the expert in these things. If you look at a statewide race, and usually most states have elected governor, lieutenant governor, and like 3 or 4 other statewide offices at the same time, secretary of state, treasurer, auditor, whatever. The number of votes for governor is usually like 20% higher than the number of votes for auditor, because people don't vote down ticket. So the people that you can wake up for, and when the people who vote up ticket, they're not voting their conscience, they're voting their party. At least down ticket, you have a better idea of hopefully making a message. And I can tell you the auditor message. So we also ran a commercial. We're going to plug, a lot of people know Matt Hudson, Mountaintop Consulting. But he filmed this amazing commercial for us. It only makes sense now to football fans, but just remember, in Massachusetts, we think differently about Tom Brady than everybody else. Starts off, it's a tight zoom on a guy's chest, and it says #1 Colts fan. And zooms out, puts on a referee's jersey. Then he walks out into Foxborough Stadium. He picks up a football and says, "Stop the game. These balls are underinflated." And then I walk out and I say, that's not right. Republicans and Democrats have been playing political football with the taxpayers' money, and the auditor is supposed to be the referee. And the referee shouldn't be wearing the jersey of one of the two teams. My name's Dan Fishman. I'm a libertarian, blah, 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 blah. That sort of thing, understanding where your message is going to be the most effective, it makes a difference. And one of the reasons that I got the Boston Globe endorsement was that when they came in and, you know, they asked me the typical questions they'll ask libertarians. Like, well, what do you think about returning the country to the gold standard? I'm like, look, I'm running for auditor. This is what I'm focused on. I'm focused on making sure that I know where every penny went in and I know where every penny went out. One of the things that really concerns me is that the Steamship Authority has had breakdowns, and yet the auditor hasn't audited the Steamship Authority in 17 years. We don't know. How old are those engines? How old are the people? Blah, blah, blah. And so talk about the issues. If you talk about something downstream, you can be very specifically focused on what the office is supposed to do. I mean, the governor or president, I'm not running for president, but even the governor is supposed to have a much broader thing, a directional thing. That would be a nice thing. I look forward to the day that, you know, knock on wood, Vermin Supreme might be running for governor in the state of Massachusetts. That would be awesome if he does. If he doesn't, I understand that too. But, you know, that's the sort of thing that you can, a candidate like that can do a good job running for governor. A candidate who can talk about issues can do a great job running for an office where issues are really important. So those are my basic thoughts about that.
Do you think that wider, that broader topic basis also is part of the reason why people tend to lean towards those races, because they don't actually want to stick down the way that you did?
Well, there's a lot of that for sure. The other thing about it is that, you know, there is a tribalism, right? We talked about Red Sox Yankees a little bit, and I'm going to quote Larry Sharp here, but I'm a Red Sox supporter. Okay, it's not just a political choice. You live in Boston long enough, it's going to happen.
I'll forgive you.
So right, you're a New York guy. You're probably a Yankees guy, right?
I am, but I'm a Patriots guy, so we can agree there.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, it's not like the Jets are giving you a lot of options. But I support my team, no matter who the manager is. They can change the lineup, anything like that. They can go from being a small ball team, manufacturer runs to this year's team was a big hitter, powerful lineup, stuff like that. Doesn't matter. Support the Red Sox. A lot of people are like that with the old parties, Republicans and Democrats, and they're just going to support the party. At least down ticket, people don't think about it being really a party race. Now, there's a lot of people who just check off the parties. That's the way it is. Massachusetts doesn't have straight ticket balloting, but some places, like I believe Michigan still does, a few other places, which is a disaster. But at least you can hope sometimes that if people get down ticket, they'll be a little smarter about it. In Massachusetts, actually, we tried to change the law so that when they printed the ballot, they couldn't print party designations on it. They just printed people's names. I'm like, that would be a really good idea. Of course, it's a really good idea. That's why they wouldn't let us do it. But one of those things, I think that down ticket is a better place. And I wouldn't advise somebody, if you really want to run and you really want to win, pick a smaller race. Pick a nonpartisan race, right? I mean, we've won a lot of nonpartisan races in the country. I think there's something like, 700 elected libertarians right now. That's amazing. And almost all of them are nonpartisan races. In fact, I don't know if there are any in partisan races. So if you want to win,
Pennsylvania is weird because a lot of they have partisan races like all the way down the ballot. So they're like, of their 250 this year, I think over 200 of them were still partisan races.
Sort of. The way the Moulton maneuver works is that, what they did is they identified all the races. Hang on one sec. When the wife types, I answer. The way the Moulton maneuver works is you identify the races in which neither a Republican nor a Democrat is running. And then because of a weird thing in terms of registration time, a Libertarian can register for that race. So Libertarian didn't beat a Republican or a Democrat in those races. So it's sort of nonpartisan, but it is a partisan office. And so I'm glad, I'm excited about everything that's happening in Pennsylvania. That state is being run fantastically well right now.
True that. And shout out to Sam Robb, who's in the comments, because he's a big hitter down there.
Well, he's not just a big hitter down there. I can let you in on a little spilling a little tea here. Last night, Sam Robb became the vice chair of People for Liberty.
Oh,
yep,
that's
very exciting.
Awesome.
You are breaking the news, my friend. We haven't put out a press release or anything yet. We weren't going to say anything till the new year, but since it came up, let's put it out there.
That's really cool. That's exciting. I've been a big fan of Sam since his presidential race. He was one of the few people in the primary that, and I probably shouldn't have said that way, but he was one of the few people in the primary I actually liked.
No, I mean it's a fair comment. I will tell you that remember I'm ED at the time. I was hesitant about somebody getting into the race late, but Sam convinced me. His dedication, sincerity, and his true passion for other people, which I think is the heart of libertarianism, shown through immediately. I'm very excited for us being able to work together coming forward in the future.
Yeah. And he was an interesting just person in my life because I was kind of finishing up my walk away from the faith while like really, really enjoying this like libertarian Christian guy who was able to mesh those two ideologies together really well and show me that like real Christianity is libertarianism if you apply it correctly, and kind of like helped me not like rage quit the faith as much as just kind of like peacefully walk away and say maybe this isn't for me, because I had like somebody that I was watching fairly consistently that was like proving that not all Christians are authoritarian nut jobs that are voting for Trump.
Right. Right. Well, and it is an interesting thing because faith is one of those things that's so personal. And it's obviously one of those things that they tell you shouldn't talk about a lot in a public forum. But for me, I am pleased to meet people for whom faith is a guiding light. Because invariably, I find that they're not in it for themselves. And that is extremely libertarianism, right? We're the only ones who we don't want liberty just for ourselves. We want liberty for everybody because we know there is no liberty for us without everybody else. And so it's an important thing.
Yeah, for sure. So you've done a lot of various things in a lot of different fields, from like what you did with Mass General to then, stuff within the LP and now kind of more activist based, external partisan stuff that you're doing with People for Liberty. And like all of which have objectively like saved lives, like changed people's lives, like really made a difference. Of those kind of three areas of, normie versus electoralism versus activism, which of those, if you had to quantify it, do you think had more of an effect on the world?
Without question. Well, it's going to be tough. So as you might guess, I'm going to tell some stories here. But I was a special education teacher. But in 2010, I talked about going back into writing software for special education. That was very meaningful for me. Anybody who's familiar with special education, a lot of other people might know what an IEP is, individualized education plan. Every student in the United States who's in special education gets an IEP. The company that I worked for, eSped, was the 800-pound gorilla of IEPs. And they brought me in to do big data work on the IEPs to make special education better. So an IEP has goals and objectives and then progress reports. And so one of the things we did is we set it up so that we could normalize the data and say, okay, now our software is being used for, 700,000, 1 million IEPs around the country. Let's look at these goals and these objectives and then look at the progress reports. And we can empirically say, is this a good objective? Is this a good goal for a kid with this diagnosis? And if we see the results that we expect, we can say, let us suggest this goal and this objective for the next IEP. We think that this will have a lot of positive results for you. Or if we don't see the results, we might say, hey, maybe this diagnosis is wrong. You might look at it. So that was very impactful for me to do that. And then my nephew, my brother's oldest boy, is somewhere on the spectrum. And he started off with an IEP, but he doesn't have an IEP anymore. And back when I was teaching, that didn't happen a lot. So to see the progress that special education has made and how many kids and families, because it's not just the kids, right? It's the families who are also touched by a special education student, to see how their lives are changed by making this better. Because the life of a parent with a special education student is nothing but worry. What happens when I'm gone? Who's able to take care of my kid? And if we can get that kid to a place where they can care for themselves, it's a huge win. So that's probably the most impactful thing that I've done. However, working at Mass General, I worked there for 8 years. I wrote the distance learning program that they were using there. That was a very meaningful thing because Mass General, the initials are MGH, stands for Man's Greatest Hospital. We joke around. It stands for Massachusetts General Hospital. But while I was there in Boston, there was a terrorist attack in Boston during the marathon. And 187 people were wounded. Every person who made it to a hospital survived. 184 people survived. And the reason why, there's a couple of reasons. The first is that, almost nothing good came out of Iraq and Afghanistan. But we did learn some stuff about emergency trauma surgery. The major hospitals in Boston recognized that. And in preparing for what things were going to be like, they established a policy that there was always going to be a combat trauma surgeon on duty at any given time in all of the Boston hospitals. So they were already prepared for that. And people who watch MASH back in the day, triage used to be, okay, we take him first, then him, then him, then him. Modern trauma triage is we work on this guy for 10 minutes and then we can put him away for 6 hours. And that increases their capacity for the number of patients they can handle. That happens right away. Secondly, in Mass General in Boston, they have one of their policies is you never wait more than 5 minutes in the ER before you see a doctor, because they are man's greatest hospital. And it's very important for them to do that. That means that the doctor in charge of the ER is extremely senior and has a tremendous amount of power. And so if they're short doctors and people are having to wait too long, he can call anybody and summon them down to the ER. So he sees the first explosion go off at 3:04. He gets on the phone. He has a code that allows him to talk to the entire hospital over the PA system. And he says, everybody who just finished the 7 to 3 shift, we need you to return to your post right now. Talk to your supervisor. So immediately the hospital is double staffed. Then, all the other hospitals are doing the same thing about it. They'd had a plan. They planned for, and I will complain about the excessive costs in healthcare and stuff like that, but they had a plan for a trauma. They had a plan for this stuff. And so immediately hospitals, ambulances are there and they're transporting people away. They're not overloading any one hospital. There's 7 major hospitals. They're splitting them all up, stuff like that. You contrast that to 6 months later, there's this big attack in Paris. And it's not like France is a third world country. People died on the street. And so I can't really take any credit for any of the good stuff that happened at Mass General on that day when they proved that they were the greatest hospital. But I was working there. I was working there at the time. I was a little piece in the machine. And so I'm very proud of that as well. So most of the stuff that I'm proud of, none of it is really political. I mean, I'm doing the political stuff, but I'm proudest of the work where I directly saw it help people.
Yeah, I can definitely I can't relate, but I can understand. And I feel like there's a lot of people. I have a lot of friends that are in the process of kind of figuring out what they actually want to do with their lives, and they let the LP likes to soak up any amount of free time or free energy that you have.
Right.
So a lot of my friends are similar in age to me, somewhere between 20 and 30, and they allowed what would have been their mess around with a bunch of hobbies and jobs and careers and figure out what they want to do, spent most of that time in the LP and let that soak it all up. And they didn't actually go through the decision-making process that most people do in their 20s of like, what do I actually want to care about? What do I actually want to do in my life? And they end up getting drilled into this, it's all about electing libertarians. It's all about electing libertarians. That's how we're going to save the world. And I feel like there's so many people in the liberty movement that could probably do more for liberty, do more for the world, and more for themselves, going and getting what we would consider a normie job and just saving people's lives.
100%. So we had a guy on one of my Liberty lunches relatively recently, financial literacy for liberty. You can do more for the party by, being financially stable by the time you're 40 than you can by doing anything else. Because the ability to write, $3,000-$4,000 checks, which you can do if you've had a normal career and you're 40 years old. Now, I want to take that back a little bit. Not everybody's career path works out the same way, but if you focus on your career, you have a better chance of being able to, let's just say, do $5,000 a year in political donations when you're 40 than if you've been working for campaigns the entire time. Yeah. And $5,000 in political donations, right? If we had, if we had 20,000 people doing that, that's $1 billion. Yeah, that's $1 billion. 20,000 times 5,000.
Oh yeah, no, you're right.
And so, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, that's real money. We need libertarians to handle their business, quite literally, and have enough money so that we can support the political movement. So it's great. We need all the volunteers. We need all the door knockers we can and stuff like that. But if you're wondering what to do and how to get involved, and one of your options is, have an awesome career, that's a great way to help liberty. It really is.
Yeah. And people underestimate the ability to to still message liberty through so many other things. And like I have a bunch of friends that are like tax preparers.
Right.
Like I personally consider that the most libertarian profession you can get into. And a lot of people like balk at that because they're like, oh, they're the tax collectors. But they're not the collectors. They're the
Definitely
people
not.
helping you not get as much tax collected. Like their entire job is how can we get around tax code? And
Yep.
no one hates taxes more than a tax preparer. And nobody hates the size of the tax code more than a tax preparer.
Yep. And it's interesting because, again, on that show that we did, the Liberty Lunch for Fiscal Liberty, we talked about the fact that most people don't realize that if you really want to fight the government, have a Roth IRA, max out your 401k. Don't give the government that tax money. Find a way to not pay your taxes legally. And, you know, I'm not saying anything about any other way of not paying your taxes, but find
Yeah,
a
I
way
mean,
to not
I
pay your taxes.
personally go by the Dan Berman style of fuck the IRS. They haven't touched my money in 6 years.
I would say that people should take their own counsel on that sort of thing. Think
Agreed.
about what works for you.
Mhm.
However,
It's
it
the
is
one
a-
advantage of working on campaigns and making like almost $0 all year is that the IRS isn't even mad at me for it yet.
right, exactly. And that's definitely true. I mean, they're overworked, so they're not really mad at anybody. But for sure, the poor people that they, you know, aren't going to be paying many taxes, they're not going to do anything for. They're not going to come after you because it's not worth it for them. However, you raise a great point. If you can go out there and make a lot of money and come back and support liberty in 10, 15, 20 years, because it'll have a much bigger impact. You know, we were talking about this the other day. There's a libertarian in Massachusetts who, you know, he was politically active and stuff like that, but he worked very hard on his career. And now he's retired. And, you know, he's able to give away $100,000 a year to libertarian causes.
Mhm.
That's a big deal. That's bigger than if, you know, he'd gone out and run or written or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So definitely. And the other thing about it is, and this, you know, a lot of people don't get this, but for example, when I was executive director and I had to hire a director of development, you know, I got a lot of libertarians saying, oh, you know what? I did fundraising for the Sam Jones campaign for State House in 14. I would be a great director of development. I said, you know, I have a criteria. Just to get in the door, you have to be able to demonstrate that you raised over $1 million in a year. And people complained, oh, you're eliminating libertarians, you know, you're a socialist, blah, 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 whatever it is. I'm like, no, I want people who can demonstrate success in their personal and professional lives. And if your job is a fundraiser, friggin' show me that you were able to do it. Because $1 million isn't that much in the grand scheme of things. And so, you know, I had 2 people come in who met that criteria, interviewed them both. And, you know, one of them is the current director of development, Tara DeSisto.
Nice.
And if anybody who knows anything about money and fundraising knows that she's doing an unbelievable job right now. This year, the year after a presidential election, is traditionally the worst year in a 4-year cycle for fundraising for the Libertarian Party. This year is going to be better than last year. It's astonishing. It's an unbelievable number. And people who don't talk about it, they're just not paying attention. They don't really care about the rest of the stuff.
Yeah. I had Todd Hagopian on the show a while ago at this point. It's probably been 4 or 5 months now. And even back then he was talking about, you know, he wants to run for treasurer to fix some stuff, but he can see that there's already a few things that have improved heavily with some of the people that are there, and just how much better we're doing at fundraising and how much more professional we are at fundraising. The fact that the phone call that he got, like the person knew how much he had donated previously, knew what he did, like could have a personal conversation. It wasn't just a cold call from someone that got handed an Excel spreadsheet. It was like an actual phone banking operation going on.
Yep.
Which we could use a lot more of that legitimacy. And I feel like that's another reason why I try to push people out of the liberty movement temporarily sometimes, like I feel like this conversation might do, is because you pick up how to actually do things right outside of the liberty movement, and then you can bring that experience back, because you're not going to learn how to fundraise correctly for a campaign in the Libertarian Party unless you're working on one of like 3 or 4 campaigns that actually has their shit together.
Right. And you so I was thinking about this today. I actually was out raking leaves for the last time, thank goodness. And
we're already shoveling, man.
Yeah, sorry to hear that, man. Don't say that dirty 4-letter word that begins with S and talks about the white stuff on the ground. But so in software, you have these QA, quality assurance, and I think other jobs have that. And there's always an adversarial relationship between software engineers and QA. And that's dumb. The most important lesson that I learned professionally and then personally is that these are people who are being paid to criticize me so that the work that I put out will be better. So every time that they do that, I should be grateful to them for criticizing me. That is not something the Libertarian Party is good at either. But it's an important thing that you would learn working a real job, learning that the people who are criticizing you aren't doing it because they hate you. They're doing it because they want you to be better. So find a way to be better and not to produce something that will make people criticize you.
Yeah, there's a really good Alan Watts quote that I think about often, where he's talking about kind of the duality of personality, and kind of like brings up kind of a duopoly mindset. But he talks about like that, I don't know that I advocate my side unless you advocate your side. And so when we argue, I say thank you.
Yeah, 100%.
And yeah, that was a big lesson that I had to learn, because yeah, it's not nice. It's not fun to get criticized or to have your work be torn apart and changed up and have to go back and redo stuff. But if the end product is better, if your next campaign you actually win, your next product actually works, you're actually like making sales now, you're improving, that was 100% worth it.
Yeah, and it's a critical thing to being open to criticism, because one of the things that controversial name, but Nick Sarwark, when he was chair, would tour around and he said, I would like every libertarian to, when you're having a conversation with a non-libertarian, to begin your reply to what they say, start off by saying, you might be right. Because that tells people that you've heard them and that you're open to the idea that other people's places and thoughts are valid. Now, the fact is, libertarians, we've thought about these issues a lot more than the general public, stuff like that. But if we can't show them that we're listening, talking about their concerns, one of the things that Joe Jorgensen talks about all the time, people don't really care about the Fed. They don't care about the war on drugs unless it affects them personally. And so, the war on drugs, it's a big deal. It's a tremendous thing. But really, the number of people that it's actually affected directly, it's a small number. But everybody sends their kids to school. Everybody has to pay their power bill. Those sort of things. Finding a way to hear what people are telling you, because people will tell you what they want to hear from you if you just listen to them. And that's a big step for us as well, is learning that part about it, learning to listen to people. And then when they're critical of the stuff that we have to say, if they didn't care, they just walk away. You should be grateful to the people who care enough to give you some critical feedback.
Yeah. I remember when I was running for New York City Council in 2019, I had palm cards. I only made one set of palm cards that I handed out. It was a very low fund campaign and a very half-assed one at that. But I had like 5 planks on it, and 2 of them were legalized cannabis and decriminalized sex work. You're muted.
Sorry.
Okay. And those were the 2 that I got the most pushback on. And I sort of I expected pushback on the decriminalization of sex work. I was running in a conservative Democratic district. But I was running in a 75% African American or Caribbean American district that's like 90-something% Democrat. I figured cannabis legalization would just be a home run for everybody in my area. You know, I'm talking to normal Black people from New York. I figured like I walk down these streets smoking weed and like nod to everybody. Like I thought we were all cool on this, but I got a lot of pushback on that issue from like, 50 to 80-year-old like grandmas that are coming up to me with, oh, but if we legalize it, then my kid's gonna be smoking it, or it's gonna smell like weed everywhere. And to that I was like, have you sniffed around here? We're in Flatbush, it already smells like weed. But I had a bunch of pushback on that, and because of that, I'm pretty good at arguing cannabis decriminalization and legalization to a very wide variety of different people from all across the political spectrum, because I never had someone push that concern and not walk away convinced. I had a 100% conversion rate on that specific issue with voters that I talked to in person. They all walked away going, you know what, you're right, I think I'm going to vote for you.
And that's the critical skill. I had an interesting thing when I was running for auditor. Most of the Republican candidates running thought I was better than the Republican running for auditor. And in fact, the Republican candidate for attorney general invited me to a lot of his events. Now, the thing about it was, he was very much a drug warrior. He was running for office. He'd been an attorney because his son had died from an overdose 2 years beforehand. And so we didn't have to agree on that issue. I didn't give him a free pass on it. On the other hand, I said, let's just talk about this. So I have to tell this story. The Massachusetts legalizes in 2016, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm a person, I smoked cigarettes as a kid, ripped up my lungs. I can't smoke anything anymore, but I love edibles. So when Massachusetts legalizes, I'm like, I'm going to start growing. Very excited about this. My wife and I have been growing vegetables for forever, and we're good at growing vegetables. I'm like, we're going to crush cannabis because it's already pretty easy to grow, and just a little love and care.
It's called weed for a reason.
Exactly. So we start growing, and we get these amazing plants, like 12 feet high. However, you would think that I, as a cannabis advocate for a long time, would have understood the plants stink unbelievably. Oh my God. And I had no idea. Like, I couldn't smell my pool anymore. All I could smell was weed growing. And I'm like, so I want to keep growing, but next year we're growing way out on the other side of the backyard. We're not growing it anywhere near the house anymore. So that's my thing. And thank you for the comment, whoever made that comment.
That's actually that's one of the 3 volunteers that I had on that city council campaign.
Awesome.
He's in that area of Flatbush. Yeah, I remember when you came to New York, you had pictures of your plants growing up the side of your house.
My cannabis porn.
Oh man,
it's one of the things I really miss in Maryland. Obviously, we can't grow here. In Jersey's legalized recreational, but it's still, I think a year away from actually having recreational stores. And then Virginia's supposed to be open at some point, but we'll see. I do miss, and I'm not a giant consumer, but I fly a lot of places, and I find 5 milligrams means I don't mind being in the middle seat on an airplane.
Yeah. I can't fly sober anymore. After I did it stoned a couple of times, I was like, I'm never doing this without cannabis ever again. Because I'm the type, I hate airports. I'm fine with flying. Like, I'm not scared we're going to crash or any of that crap. I just hate the hurry up and wait mentality.
Yeah.
I hate I can't go back outside and smoke a cigarette after I go through TSA.
Yeah.
I don't like the whole process. And so weed helps most of that, except for the nerves whilst going through TSA.
Right. I hear you. And the timing is a big deal. I usually will go through TSA and then consume on the other side. But I also, I'm another one that, like, I'm always struck by the incredible weirdness of air travel just to begin with. that normally if I want to go from here to the other side of the house, I walk, right? And if I want to go further, I move faster. But in a plane, you get in there and you sit very still to move very far. So weird. But that might be the THC speaking.
So tell me, what is an executive director?
You are, and it's good if you have some business background, you are the chief operating officer of the organization. So you're not in charge of everything. You don't necessarily determine what the organization does, but you're in charge of making sure that everything happens successfully. So you should be a doer if you want to be an executive director. You should have a successful history of doing a lot of things, being able to work with teams very effectively, and being able to understand what the problem actually is that you're trying to solve too. A lot of times, a lot of people start doing things because they want to do things. There's a phrase, work smarter, not harder. An executive director's job is essentially to make sure that the organization does that you're fulfilling the goals, your mission statement, you're staying on task, and then operating effectively. But another thing that the executive director does is you are responsible for the budget. And so executive director does a tremendous amount of fundraising too. And this is where I have to mention peopleforliberty.org, number 4, scrolling across the bottom. You'll see a donate button there. It is the holiday season. We're doing a lot of interesting work. It's listed on there on the page. Raising money is a very important part of the executive director's position as well. And one of the interesting things about it is you can sort of determine how you're going to raise that money. If you have a great director of development, you'd be foolish to get in their way. But look at a lot of things. So one of the things that I did when I was executive director of the Libertarian Party, we'd had a sort of a blow up, as the Libertarian Party does. This one was the last Arvin one, where a lot of people were like, well, they didn't get rid of Arvin, and so we're not donating anymore. And membership fell all the way down to actually just under $14,000, 14,000 members. And that was after I'd been there 3 months. It had been declining steadily. So I said, this is low-hanging fruit. Let's increase membership, because all of our members are giving us at least $25 a year, but probably more. And so, one of the things that I'm proudest of during my tenure there is I said, okay, we're going to have an emphasis on membership. Jess Mears was membership manager while I was there. We did a daily report. How much did we increase membership by? How much did we lose? What are we doing wrong? What do we address that? Things like that. And it's really important to sort of see the cyclical things about it and graphing things and stuff like that. To make a long story short, in the 18 months that I was there and we focused on membership, we grew membership by 50%. That's not just whistling Dixie. That is an impressive number. I'm very proud of that.
Hell yeah.
That's a critical thing. And we gave the party a lot of financial solvency that allowed us to hire a director of development, that allowed us to do a lot of the things that the party is doing now because we have more money. So executive director, you are the chief operating officer. You make sure the lights stay on. You make sure that the directions are clear to everybody on your staff. And you should be able to do everything, but you should really only be doing the things that you can do best. That's essentially it.
I like that. So do you think that an executive director suffers from the same kind of like decision fatigue as, say, a chair or president would?
Oh,
or
absolutely.
do they get to?
No, absolutely. The job is exhausting. And there really isn't a vacation. I mean, this is part of sort of the nature of what I did. But in my time there, 2 years, I took 3 days off. That was it. All the rest of the time, because there was always something going on. And sometimes, I might schedule a day off, but then something would have come up. I would have to be involved in it because, small staff, stuff like that. And there's a lot of things that, sometimes there are things, if you are a person with some ability, you can do a lot of things. So, we had a weird scenario when I was there that about 6 months after I came in, a guy named Eric, who was in charge of digital stuff, the website and things like that, died. And so we didn't have the money to replace him. In fact, taking his salary and putting it to other things kept us afloat during a very tough month. So I picked up all of that work because I had the ability to do all of those things. But, it's incredibly exhausting. And then obviously, the most exhausting thing of all was the online conventions. That was just overwhelming. I was going, it was interesting because we had a plan, March 6th, I submitted a plan to the LNC, how we do a virtual convention. And a lot of people were really mad about that. Oh, you're trying to undermine the physical convention, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, look, I don't care if we use this at all, but we have a professional company that does elections online who will give us 5 days of voting for $9,000. Let's just spend that $9,000 right now. These guys had done 180 county elections around the United States. Very impressive stuff like that. The LNC chose not to act on that. And then finally, Nick comes up. He says, well, we've passed the vote. We're going to have an online convention in 10 days. Make it happen, Fishman. Woohoo! I was fortunate to have some great people working with me. Tyler Harris, the current executive director, Ryan Graham down in Georgia, a bunch of other technical people. And I'm sorry that I'm not remembering all their names, but so we cranked out a system and we made it work. But man, I mean, that was just crazy. We had to go, we had to be online and testing like 5 days after Nick said to go. So, we were testing and refining. We had all those rooms. People remember we had practice conventions and stuff like that. So when the time came, it worked pretty well. And then obviously in the second app, the second one, which was the hybrid, we thought we were going to have the Porcupine app. But I had been not lucky enough. I'd been trying to help out with the demos for the Porcupine app. And it occurred to me, it might not work. And so let me have a backup plan available just in case it doesn't work. And then unfortunately, it didn't work, but we did have a backup plan in place. And so we were able to get things done. But that was brutal. I can tell you that after that, I was exhausted. And it's a weird thing to be like when you're that tired from mental work, you just don't know what's going on. You're just so focused on I would move out into other places and stuff like that. And the thing was too, all the time, when the delegates would take a break, I had all this clerical work that I had to do to catch up on everything else the whole time. So it was exhausting, but I didn't have to go to any of the parties in the evening. So I had to do that. That would have been the end because the convention parties always kill me. I'm hoping, I'm very excited that in Reno, I'm probably not going to be a delegate, unfortunately, but I'm excited to go to the convention and not have any responsibilities except for representing people for liberty. And so I can go to all the parties.
I hear you there. I'm a state committee member, so I have a guaranteed spot as a delegate if I want it. I'm going to turn that down.
Nice.
Because I want the same thing. I don't feel like being
Have you ever been to a national convention?
I haven't yet.
So you should be a delegate. It's awesome. Being on the floor. There are going to be times that there's going to be a standing vote and we all stand up to be counted. And Mark Montoni comes and he points at you. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you sit down when he points at you. That sort of thing. Being a part of that, voting on the bylaws, stuff like that, it's meaningful. So I would say think about keeping your position.
I haven't 100% made that decision, but I'm fairly certain because I'm also going to be running at least one table, if not 2 or 3. For various things. Very difficult. Yeah, and then I also intend to get reasonably fucked up on drugs and alcohol.
I hear you.
I don't intend on waking up early enough to be in the business meeting in the morning. But
Right.
yeah, I actually have not been to really many libertarian things at all until this year. The first ever convention that I went to was Pennsylvania's in 2021. And then I've been to 5 state conventions and YALCON since then.
Right. And it's awesome, right? Conventions are awesome. This
Mhm.
feeling of being there, the National Libertarian Convention. I mean, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a pretty nasty convention. But
I hope not.
I truly hope not too. But we'll see.
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of things do tend to go along much better when we get together in person, and so I hope that it won't be so bad. But I don't know. Anyway, consider being a delegate. Voting is a real privilege.
My goal is to just go there as a Nugg of Knowledge representative and just get everyone so high that they can't fight with each other anymore. That's that's the goal.
I hear you.
So I want to real quick go back to what we were talking about with People for Liberty, and just a short bit about why what you were talking about with accurate data is important. If you're watching and you don't know what data is used for in politics, go watch my episode with Caitlin Cloven. It was a couple months ago, where we get into like what data is in general. But I want you to talk a little bit about how you guys are really using it with People for Liberty.
One of my favorite phrases is money is the mother milks of politics, but data is its daily bread. The most important thing that you can do in any task is, before you start the task, define what success and what failure looks like. Okay? Because otherwise you have no way of knowing whether or not what you're doing is good. So having those metrics of what is success and what is failure, that's great. Now, how do you measure those? You measure those with data. So there's the data of the people, but there's also the data of what you're doing and how that relates to the people. So as an example, we have a data list of, 500,000 people. Touching all those people is one thing, but engaging them is something else. And so finding a way to know when people are responding to the stuff that you're doing, that's how things become important. And more than that, finding all the data on the people who weren't on your list beforehand. One of the critical things that we look at is, how much has our list grown over the last month, last week, stuff like that. A lot of what we're focused on, I'm going to give you some internal language that we use for projects. We are building what we call the call, the critically analyzed liberty list. And so we have a list of people who are, one way or another, somehow involved in a liberty thing. And so, as an example, one of the things we do, I talked about me being an engineer in Massachusetts. There's the campaign finance site is called OCPF, and that is publicly available information. And you are allowed to use it for electoral purposes, for political purposes, as opposed to the FEC data, which you can't use for political purposes. But so I wrote a little screen scraper that goes through, and every candidate that I can identify as a liberty candidate, I know who all their donors are. I put them into my little database, and I say, this is, Dave Fite. He came in because he gave money to Thomas Queter, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those things about it. And so then I come back and I touch you when I say, you know what? There's this raw milk bill going on right now in upstate New York. I think that, you might be interested in going to Albany and testifying on that. So, I talked about CALL being the critically analyzed liberty list. We also have a project called ALL, affecting liberty legislation. So we are building the largest database of all liberty legislation in state houses across the country, because we can do more at the state house level than we can at the federal level right now. So if I know that there's a liberty issue in the legislature, I can contact the people who are, within 100 miles of Albany. I mean, obviously 100 miles of Albany goes into Massachusetts, but whatever, driving distance in New York residents, and say, hey, there are these bills that are going to be in Albany and there's public comment going on. What's the chance that we can get you down there? So building the data list for anything. And this means, sometimes, we're going to be running an ad in Reason Magazine at some point in time. Okay. It's going to have a code in it so that I know all the people who responded to that ad came in through Reason Magazine. That's very important. Knowing that data, figuring out who these people are, putting them into the list and saying, okay, what do we do with them? And then cross-referencing them, right? Because a lot of the people, hopefully they're coming in with an email address. I like to use email addresses like my primary key for people who understand what I mean by that. That's the identifier of how I knew. Some people use multiple email addresses. What are you going to do about it? But for most people, that's a good way to say how many unique people do I actually have in my database? Figuring out who they are and then assigning things to them. And then on the top end of it, there are big data companies like L2 and I360 who, if you give them a list of email addresses, they'll come back and tell you, oh, this person's a Republican, this person's a Democrat. And what they do, this is my suspicion, I don't know this, but in a lot of states, you can go to the Secretary of State and get the voter list. Okay. It tells you which primary they voted in, but it also tells you their street address. Doesn't have their email address. However, Amazon knows people's street addresses and their email addresses because you order stuff with your email address and then it gets shipped to you. And so if you can combine those two lists, now you've got a really accurate list of this person voted in the Republican primary and their email address is such and such on Amazon. So I'm going to assume that they're a Republican or whatever. Getting the data from all over the places and then being able to make the connections to all of those things is really valuable. And then there's some things that we're doing right now that are bigger than just the smaller liberty movement right now. We want to find people who are single issue liberty people. Homeschooling is huge right now. We want to put the homeschooling people into our database so that we can say, we want to tell you about more homeschooling stuff that's going on. And we're not going to push them on Second Amendment. We're not going to push them on legalizing drugs because we want to have that segmentation, that discrimination to say, this is the issue. They might not be ready to hear any of those issues. And if all they ever want to hear from us is homeschooling, that's fine. But most people, right, when you start learning about the real liberty issues, you start rubbing shoulders with libertarians who care about advancing the movement as opposed to libertarians who care about shrinking the movement. When you encounter those good libertarians, you become more libertarian yourself. And so that's what People for Liberty is focused on. And then we have a lot of partnerships with a lot of groups too. Students for Liberty, Rank the Vote, a lot of liberty organizations around the country. In many ways, there's too many liberty organizations for everybody to know everything that's going on. So we have a partner page where we are sort of the information center for the National Park of Liberty. You go in, you say, hey, I'm here. You say, oh, you like pandas? Pandas are over here. You like guns? Guns are over here. Whatever is your liberty jam, we want to be able to facilitate you to the other.
Where do I find pandas with guns?
Well, I would say, if you like, if you are a cannabis person, let us show you towards Nugg of Knowledge.
Right, and you guys are partnered with Nugg of Knowledge.
We are indeed partners with Nugg of Knowledge. We're building the big partner page right now. That's
great. I didn't realize all of the things that you guys were doing over there, and I knew I was going to learn more about People for Liberty tonight, and that was part of the goal. But real quick before we wrap up, tell people how they can find you guys, how they can donate. Pitch yourself one more time.
So people can find us at peopleforliberty.org. Sign up for the newsletter. That'll happen very quickly. peopleforliberty.org/newsletter. If you want to donate, there's a big donate button on the top of the page. We have a lot of exciting stuff happening in 2022. So signing up for the newsletter is the easiest way to find out about the big stuff that's happening. We have been very fortunate to get some funding that is going to allow us to do some really big things in the next couple of months. People are going to want to know about them, and I want to tell you about them. So make it easier for me. Sign up for the newsletter right now. It's an easy thing to do. Follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/peopleforliberty. at People for Liberty on Twitter and Instagram. Easy to do all of those things. And then hear what we're doing. I don't want to sell you on anything that you don't want to do. But if you think the liberty movement needs to be larger than the Libertarian Party, People for Liberty is a good place to start. Our name is specifically chosen. We don't want to be just the Libertarian Party. We don't want to be just people for guns, people for cannabis, people for homeschooling. We want to be people for liberty. That means you and me.
I love it. Guys, you heard him. Go sign up for their newsletter. Give them your data so that he can track you all creepily like he was telling us how.
Exactly.
Go follow them on everything and then donate some money and definitely stay informed on all the things that they're doing because they're, I mean, are you guys, am I right in saying that you're the biggest Liberty PAC in existence right now?
I don't know, just because I don't know everything, but we're out there. So People for Liberty right now is a 501c4. We will be launching a super PAC as well at some point in time. If people are inclined to go to South by Southwest, they could expect a big announcement there where we will be having a presentation invited in as speakers. So we are certainly, I would say we are one of the largest, but I can't claim to be the largest because I don't know everybody.
Fair enough. Well, one of the largest. So go give them a follow, subscribe, and a donation. Dan, thanks so much for coming. This was great.
What a pleasure.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll be back here next week, Tuesday at an odd time. It's 5 p.m. because I'm interviewing somebody from England. And then we've got Olivia Rondow next Wednesday. So come on back. It's going to be a great time. We'll catch you then. Until then, keep up the fight.
Shut up and sit down.